Welcome to Season 2 of the Making Bank podcast, where we continue our exploration of South Florida's entrepreneurial landscape with host Keith Costello, co-founder and CEO of Locality Bank. Sit back, relax, and let South Florida visionaries guide you on an entrepreneurial journey from tribulation to triumph, sharing the very stories that have shaped them.
Andy Cagnetta, welcome to Locality Bank's Making Bank podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here.
Well, it's great to have you here. And it's interesting. I was thinking to myself, a lot of people think of entrepreneurs as people who start a business, but that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of people who buy a business. I mean, take Elon Musk, right? Everybody would say that guy's probably the number one entrepreneur in the world. And he did not start Tesla. He bought Tesla and grew it. And so that's kind of the story that we're getting at here today with Andy Cagnetta. So I want to start by talking about really your early childhood growing up. And you grew up in the Northeast, I think, right?
I grew up in Verona, New Jersey.
Okay.
And it was a great place to grow up. I mean, kind of like suburb of New York City. My dad worked in the city, commuted back and forth. And he was a corporate guy. So, kind of grew up with that kind of flavor. He was an engineer. So I thought I was going to be an engineer at one point in my life. But, looking back on it now, like doing all the things that I did, it's funny when you read about all those Gen X things, like we were left alone. We made our own money. We got jobs when we were young. All those things were true. Like, shoveling snow or working in the grocery store. All those things to kind of like make money, working the pizza parlor, as a kid, so.
So you had a lot of jobs, you worked and learned about the value of making money and those lessons early on.
Yeah. Again, I grew up, I don't want to say we grew up poor. We grew up very, very middle class. I mean, like I knew when my dad got paid because there'd be like 4 days of pasta right before that, and he did very well later on in life and he became president of the company. But, early on, they were young kids, look back now, they're in their 20s and 30s, and he was trying to make it and, and they were struggling to make ends meet. And so, it wasn't like I could walk up to him and say, "Hey, Dad, give me money," So I wanted my own money, I wanted to go out and, and buy baseball cards or, whatever we were doing that day with our friends. Yeah. So, it was always wanted to make a little money.
Cool. So, and any early lessons that you learned from your father, your mother, your family that stick with you to this day?
Yeah. I mean, my dad was a great networker. He got along well with people. He always felt that people were, a huge asset. And so I think that kind of got ingrained in me early on that, you have to treat people right and you have to have their back. And, again, in a large corporation like he was in, there was always politics and corporate politics and layoffs. They were in the energy business. So it was hot one year, dead the next. And so they were always, laying people off. And he, would always talk about, taking care of people. So I think that stuck with me for a long time.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then you go on to college and you go to Lehigh?
Yeah, I went to Lehigh University.
Great school.
Again, I thought I was going to be an engineer. I failed miserably at that. And I think it was a little bit of, not so much intelligence, although it was very hard coursework. I think it was more immaturity, right? So,
I know the feeling.
Yeah. So I didn't do well, but that was a great lesson too, right? Learning to fail, I think, is a great lesson that every entrepreneur needs and every successful person needs. They need to learn how to fail. So I failed spectacularly and, kind of it brought me, my sophomore year summer, I came home after basically failing or leaving a summer school to try to catch up in the engineering program. And my parents asked me, "What do you want to do? What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I think I want to be a businessman. I think I want to own my own business. I think I want to be in the business world." And so I went back to the business school, junior and senior year and just really enjoyed it and thrived.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
So then you graduate from Lehigh, And what's your career trajectory from there?
Yeah, it's funny. So I graduated from Lehigh and I graduated late. I had to stay for an extra summer. While all my friends graduated, I was still toiling in the library that summer. And so I didn't have any job prospects really to look at. My transcript looked like a war zone. It just wasn't very impressive. So I said, maybe I'll start my own business. So my cousin was in the cell phone business, which was an emerging business back then. So I started my own cell phone company, where we were selling. And back then, if you remember, we used to install cell phones in cars.
Yeah.
So we were like, so I started this company. It was just literally me buying cell phones from a wholesaler, selling them to people for about $1,500, almost $2,000. And I was in there drilling holes in their brand new cars and putting in antennas and hooking it up to the speakers and the power. It was wild, but it taught me so much.
So right from the get-go, you decide, hey, I'm gonna go into my own business.
Right.
So, and what year is that?
That's 1987.
1987. So I'm just thinking stock market crash that year.
Yeah, it was not a great year. It was tough.
Yeah.
And I was waiting tables at night and bartending. And I just couldn't get the cell phone thing going. I had a store. I was sharing it with a crazy person, which was another story. But, it was just tough to make ends meet. And what happened was, which put me out of business, was they went from charging about $2,000 for a cell phone, $1,000 for the brick phones, to giving them away for free within a year. I mean, they went from $2,000 for a cell phone to, hey, we're going to give you a cell phone. And so that immediately put me out of business because I couldn't buy the cell phones and then wait for the commission that came along a few months later. So that
business ends.
That business ends. And at the same time, I was at end of talking about networking. I always said my dream was to be in the guitar business. My family manufactured guitars for 100 years. And so I wanted to get into that business. They were already out of business by the time I was out of college. And so I was always talked about it. And one of the bartenders that I was working with, her friend worked at Kramer Guitars, which is a big guitar company that Eddie Van Halen was playing at the time. And she says, I'll get you a job there. And so she did. And so I entered the music industry for a little while, eventually became an entrepreneur there as well. Kramer eventually went out of business. It was funny, in hindsight, watching that, because they had a private equity group investment into the company to try to save it. It didn't work. They went out of business. I then opened up a pasta shop with my cousins in Hartford, Connecticut. So we bought a business. We ran that for 2 years and we sold it. And it's a kind of a long story, but we were struggling with that business too. But it was somewhat successful, and we sold it for more money than we bought it for. And then I got back into the music industry for a little while, selling guitars and things like that, and realizing, there's some businesses out there and industries where people work for free because they just want to work in it, like the music industry, the sports industry, and young people, wind up working there for very little money. And I realized it was a tough place to make money. So
you realize that's not how you're going to make a living. And what is your next step?
So in the process, I had met my wife, Allison. And I was working, I got a job working for her uncle in the lighting business in New York City. And we were doing retrofits for energy efficient lighting. And it was again, go business. And we were getting rebates from the utilities. And then all of a sudden it stopped. It just ended. So I was kind of standing there going, what's next? And her dad said, I want you to move to Florida. She was pregnant at the time. And she says, I really want you to raise, he wanted, and of course, his grandchildren in Florida. So my wife said, let's move to Florida, which wasn't a hard thing to convince me. I mean, growing up in the Northeast, watching it snow 20 something times in 1994, I think it was, we said, let's move to Florida. So I said, out of all the things I had done, whether it was starting my own business, whether it was, and then buying that business was quote unquote successful. I bought it for literally $45,000. We sold it for $65,000. And in between, we made some money.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that worked. I'll do that again in Florida. Mm-hmm. So I came down to Florida, and I did that without a business broker. Didn't know what a business broker was, never had met one before. And when I got down here to Florida, there was a lot of business brokers, and they were advertising in the Sun Sentinel at the time and the Miami Herald. And so you couldn't necessarily go to look to buy a business without working with one. So I started working with several of the business brokers. Mostly was disappointed in that process until I ran into Transworld one day. And Transworld was run by a 30-year IBMer by the name of Don Parrish and his wife. She was an amazing entrepreneur, and she had owned some businesses. And they were very friendly. He's from Alabama, she's from Ohio, and they invited me in, and through some conversations, they said, listen. And one of the big things was I was borrowing money from my father-in-law because I had none. And I was scared. I was like, I can't miss. Like, if I lose money that I borrow from my father-in-law, I'm going to lose my wife too, right? So I wound up, they offered me a job at Transworld, and they said, one of my big fears is I don't know what Florida is. I thought it was a bunch of old people, which maybe it is, but it's certainly more diverse now. And so I was scared. I didn't know what to buy. And so I wound up taking the job at Transworld. I figured I'd get to know the community and I would do well. And that's what I did.
So you start right around 95, I guess, at Transworld. And how did you like it? How did you like engaging
I loved it. I've sold a lot of things. Like I said, guitars, cell phones, lights, pasta. And, in those sales jobs, which I really was not very good at sales, if I didn't sell something every day, you aren't making a living. All of a sudden I come into this business and I'm like, if I sell one thing a month, I'm a hero, So it was a much slower, more consultative sales cycle, which kind of fit my personality of being in a, helping people and enabling people, giving people the tools to succeed, which is my big thing. And so I did well at it. I sold 9 businesses in 95 in an abbreviated year, and I was a hero. And so 97 rolls around, and Don Parrish's full retirement kicks in at IBM. And I look at him and I say, I came down here to do my own thing and to build something. I said, let me buy Transworld. And he said, sure, let's do it. So I bought Transworld in 97, and we had about 5 people. We were out on East Commercial Boulevard above the Fish Peddler. And we were in the upstairs, and we had about, again, 5-6 people.
Wow.
Selling some businesses, and it was a great start.
That's so cool. And I never knew that whole part of the story that you bought it in 97, and it was just 5 people.
Yeah, it was about 5 of us. Yeah, at the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And over that period of time, you built it up into what it is today, which we'll get into, but let's hear the rest of the story now. So what happens after you buy Transworld?
So I buy Transworld, and I was the youngest person there, and I told everybody, I said, my job is to give you the tools to succeed. You're all more experienced in business than me. Some of you are better salespeople than me. My job is to make sure that you have everything that you need to be successful. So that was kind of my mantra, and whether that was like putting in a computer network and giving everybody better brochures and sales tools, that's what I did. And so in 97, I was kind of hanging around, and one of my fraternity brothers from New York came down here, and they started a thing called the Capco program. And Capco program was gathering insurance money from insurance companies to reinvest in local communities. It was a thing that some of the states were doing. Lawton Childs brought it to Florida. And so they were coming down here to invest about $12 million in businesses. So we started looking they came down here, they contacted me. I started looking at businesses with them. And one lunch, we're having lunch and the three of them look at me and say, we want to invest money in Transworld. I said, really? I don't need money. What do I need money for? And they said, no, we want to help you scale Transworld. So they invested $3 million in Transworld, which sounds like a lot of money. And we had this whole .com business plan. It's 1999, the end of 1999. And we're rolling into, 2000. And by April, the .com world just explodes and is in shambles.
Right.
So they call me and they're like, don't spend the money. And I'm like, I didn't spend any of the money. And they're like, hey, but use 10% of it and go out there and build Transworld. So we did. We moved offices. We hired some of our competitors. We wound up buying one of our competitors. And it kind of started that whole snowball effect of us, taking the next steps and building Transworld into a big company.
And so with that investment, so was that almost like a grant? Or
it wasn't a grant. We actually owed them money. And then, like any good venture capital, of course, when it came due to pay it back, we couldn't pay it back. And we wound up trading it for some equity.
Okay.
So they traded it for some equity. And at the time they said, here's another $500,000, go at it.
Awesome.
So we started to build the company. They went public, changed their name to New Tech. And they had different, ideas of what, they wanted to build in their service model. And really a company that was very reliant on its revenues from transactions wasn't a good story for a public company. They want recurring revenues, they want reliable revenues, and Transworld was anything but that.
Right.
So we decided to buy them out and they agreed. Okay. So in 2002, we buy them out. Some of my internal people bought in, and we just hit the timing perfectly. We were just starting to really ramp up. So then we, in 2000, in the next few years, we start expanding, and we expand to Orlando, we expand at Tampa, we expand to Jacksonville, and we grew grew the Florida company to what it is today.
And so, listening to you talk about, this fraternity brother,
right?
As you built the company out, were there other relationships? Because you talked early about how a lesson from your father about building relationships, and so did that help you in building out the company?
Yeah, I mean, one of the other strange kind of things that happen is just talking about building out and networking. One of our attorneys early on was Greenspoon Martyrs. Greg Blodek, who worked there for many, many years. And we were friends with Jerry Greenspoon. And it was funny, they have an office in Orlando, and Michael Martyr was up there. He was working with a guy who was about to buy a franchise in the business brokerage business. And he said, hey, my guys in South Florida are working with this great company, Transworld. You shouldn't go with the franchise. You should think about partnering with them. And so, they call us up, and we wound up, stealing this guy from the franchise company, and he became our partner in Orlando. We eventually bought him out because he went on to buy some other things. He was kind of like a private equity kind of guy. But, without him, we wouldn't have had our kind of like first foray into another city in Orlando in a big way, because he was very connected in the city. He's on the board of the opera and, things like that. And Michael Martyr, of course, is very connected up there as well. So it was a great thing, crazy things like that happened along the way.
So, but I think that's important. You mentioned, the law firm, and some of these relationships can really, like with the right law firm or the right, accounting firm or other professionals, can really help you when you're scaling.
Yeah. I mean, even banking relationships, which we've had in the past, I remember when we got the $3 million, I used to go to our bank and, deposit some of our commission checks, and they would write, stamp on the back, 3-day hold, 4-day hold. And I walked in there one day and I said, for a guy who's got $3 million in the bank, I shouldn't have a 3-day hold anymore. And they're like, who's your banker? And I'm like, what's a banker? I mean, it was like literally like I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
And so I got a private banker at that time, and he was a great, you definitely need a good banker.
Who was it that you met?
It was
Or if it's anybody I know.
yes, you know who it is. I have to think about it for a second.
Okay, well,
Bank
it'll come
of
to you.
America, but yeah.
But we love those stories, even though, we wish you were talking about me, but
Yeah, no, but we've had good relationships.
We do,
too, right?
we do. But I'm just saying, but I'm joking, because we love to hear that where banks have played a role in the success of somebody's growth. And, with a lot of the entrepreneurs we talk to, that becomes an issue of where are they going to get money, and how are they, and not everybody's going out raising equity or has that ability. And a lot of times they do have to come to a bank and try to raise money that way.
Yeah. I mean, our bank was great, at that time. And, just being able to get deals done and get checks paid. And sometimes we'd run out of money or something. I mean, not that we were running out of money, but in one account instead of the other account. And,
Yeah.
and they just say, yeah, don't worry about it. So
Yeah, like, I got $3 million in the bank.
Yeah.
What do why are you giving me a hard time?
I'm trying to remember Gary's last name. It was Gary from Bank of America.
Not Facilo.
No. But anyway.
Okay. Well, it'll come to you.
Right.
But yeah. So I was there for a while too. I was at Bank of America for a while.
Yeah.
I think everybody kind of started out either there or.
Well, it was,
Barnett
we were at Barnett. Right?
Yeah.
So we were Barnett customers because they were right down the street from us on Commercial.
Yeah.
And we started there, and that's,
Yeah. Barnett
so we
was a great community bank, really.
Yeah,
And
sure.
that grew to be.
Elliott and all the people that were involved in that back then,
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're obviously, it seems like, and you haven't told us about any big problems yet.
Right.
Did you have any as you were growing the business? So, it couldn't have been that easy to go from 5 to,
Yeah, there was a few times where I thought we were going to, go out of business. I mean,
Okay,
one of them
good.
was 3 months in and I ran out of cash. I just blatantly ran out of cash, and I had to go to my father-in-law and say, hey, listen, I ran out of cash, because he lent us the money to buy the company.
Okay.
When I bought the company, and, God bless him. I always say that was the dumbest thing you ever did. And he goes, it was the smartest bet I ever made. So
That's awesome.
So he's a huge fan, and he's still with us. Thank
That's
God.
great.
So he's been able to see the success and be a part of it as well. But, of course, we thought we were on a roll. We have all these offices in 2008. Things are flying. 2006, 2007, 2008. We just, 2007, we like, what's going on out there? Things are really heated, right? And then 2008, by the end, the world ends.
Yes.
And we were caught without enough money, enough cash in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
Is something that, we didn't think about. We would distribute to all of our investors, on not a quarterly basis, basically all the money in the bank. And we just were caught.
Yeah.
And we're just like, now what do we do? And our commissions got cut in half. So, on round numbers, $10 million a year in commissions, next year, $5 million. And so we're scrambling, what do we do to, kind of, tighten our belts.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we did was, everybody was laying off employees. And, I went to all my employees and I said, here's what I'm doing. First, I'm no longer on salary. That's done. I'm foregoing salary. And I said, I have a choice. Either somebody's got to go home, or if everybody agrees to take a 10% haircut, I'll keep everybody on. And so everybody said, and it was an employee meeting, and everybody said 10% haircut. So we gave everybody a 10% haircut that year. The great news is by 2011, 12, we had given all that money back plus.
Wow.
And bonused everybody's money back. But it was
a great story.
It is a great story. And some of my employees are still with me. And that's the kind of loyalty, obviously, they have toward me and I have toward them, that, and they always remember that, and they were thankful. They appreciated that I included them, and, I still include them in my success. I do have bonuses on an annual basis and profit sharing and things like that. But, it was a really tough time. And right in the middle of it in 2009, we say, well, we're not going to be able to expand like we thought we were going to be able to expand. And we had some employee issues at that time, and running an office up in Jacksonville. And one funny story was we hired this employee in Jacksonville, and everybody's reporting to me, it's like, she's on her phone all day long. Like, something's wrong, and she's falling asleep as she. And so, I said, find out what's going on up there. And so we find out that she was actually a recording star that won a VH1 reality TV show where she got a recording contract, and she was recording at night in Orlando, and she was driving back and forth to Jacksonville, and she took the job on a bet from her staffers who said, you've never held the job. You don't know what it's like to hold the job. So she got this job with us, but she didn't know how to do anything. She lied to us anyway. So we had to fire her, and we stayed in touch with her and stuff. It was a very funny story, but it made us realize that, hey, we need partners. We're not going to be able to open up Atlanta. We're not going to be able to open up Charlotte and really nurture these because what you have to do in our business is you have to become a trusted advisor in your community. And to do that, you have to be there, and you have to work with the employees, and you have to work with our agents that we're hiring, and you have to go out in the community and be involved. Mm-hmm. And so we said, we need partners. And what's a good partnership structure? Franchising. So in 2009, when we literally we're still counting our pennies, we decided to launch a franchise with United Franchise Group, my partner, Ray Titus. And I remember him asking, he said, okay, let's start the company. They had already started a little franchise, and we were kind of acquiring it. So he said, no money down, let's take $75,000 a piece and throw it in a bank account, and that'll be the start. And I remember looking at my balance sheet going, oof, that's a lot of money. I don't have all. I mean, if I might have had all the money, but I decided that was way too much money for me to put into that. So I said, let's do $37.5 a piece, and then we'll look if we ever need more money. If we need more money in a couple of months, we'll throw it in there. We have never needed another dollar.
Wow.
So, and the company's, pretty big company these days. So.
That's awesome. And so that franchising now, tell us. Because I was reading, it's like worldwide,
so we decided
right?
The franchise, Ray Titus owns United Franchise Group, most famously owns Sinorama. They have several of their brands, like the Great Greek is now down here, and what used to be called Embroid Me is now called Fully Promoted. And they have, so they brought me in, and we decided to joint venture 50-50. They had about 12 locations in a business brokerage that they had started without me. And we renamed the whole thing Trans World. They're a fantastic franchisor. They have, I think, about 10 brands now. I am one of them. And they've taken Trans World. We have about 250 locations around the world. We are around the world we're in the UAE, we're in the UK. We just sold Spain. We've been in France for a while. We just sold Puerto Rico. It's not quite overseas, but it's certainly outside the continental United States. We're in Australia. So we've been, as South Africa. So we have locations worldwide, and inside the United States, we're just about sold out. We have coverage just about everywhere.
And do you work throughout that network? Is there if somebody had a business in California, it would be presented to your office here in Florida as well?
Yes. So we have one of the big things that, I talked about wanting to give everybody the tools to succeed. And so for years, I've been advocating internally and externally with my fellow competitors in the business that we need a central database of businesses for sale. We've created that internally, and we're still working on ways to do that externally. But we have a database now with about 5,000 listings for sale at any one time. We're trading, probably a couple of thousand of those on an annual basis. It's constantly growing. There's almost 400,000 buyers in that database as well. So we're constantly talking to each other and working with each other. Not necessarily where, if there's a hair salon in LA that we're going to have a buyer here in Florida, but certainly some of the bigger engagements that we get. We worked with our Portland office where they got the largest Christmas tree farm in the United States. It was about a $40 million deal, and we helped them find the buyer here in Florida. So, things like that do trade back and forth.
The larger deals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've grown the business, you've expanded it worldwide. I mean, it's a tremendous success story, Andy. Really, it's very impressive. What's the future look like for you in Transworld?
Yeah, I mean, the future, I think, everybody's looking at things like AI and data, and we think there's a few things going on out in the marketplace that have changed too, which some of them about, right? So one of the things that happened at the beginning of the year was the SEC, the federal government came up with a thing called the Brokerage Simplification Act, which actually modified the SEC regulations for selling portions of businesses. And I'd been on a committee for about 16 years that we worked on this project to get the United States, get the SEC to recognize that some small businesses sell portions of the business. And when that happens, we don't want to run afoul of stock sale laws. So what we did was we changed the law, and now anything, and there's some guidelines to it, and you could read about it, but basically anything under $250 million in value, a business owner can sell, and a broker can handle up to 20% or more can sell a controlling interest in that business and not run afoul of SEC regulations. In the Job Act several years ago or a few years ago, they made it legal to crowdfund for equity in businesses. The SBA just came out with a new SOP, as that made it possible for the SBA loans to fund portions of business instead of having to buy 100% of the equity. All those things, I think, and I predict, will create a way for business owners to trade equities in small businesses. What does that look like? Does that look like a NASDAQ for small businesses? Yeah, maybe it does. And I think business brokers and Transworld in particular can be a part of that, like the early days of the stock market where you needed a stockbroker to help you in that transaction. I think the early days of people trading equities in their business or trading portions of their business or raising capital, think of this small business owner that has one location for a restaurant and says, I really want to open up 2 or 3 more, but they have a fantastic following locally. I think eventually that business owner will be legally allowed to, and there's still some hurdles with how they advertise and who does the investments, but will eventually be able to advertise equity in that business for sale. People will be able to partner in that business for sale. There will be a way for that owner to use that equity to grow. So I think there's going to be a whole push for people to sell those kind of businesses. And I think in the future, all these people who are NILs, name, image, and likeness, selling, having a business in that, their own business, being able to sell that business, or people who are influencers being able to sell that business. I think there's a lot of interesting things moving forward that we can, facilitate helping people sell.
Do you ever now get involved in raising capital?
So the short answer is yes. And the way to do that without running afoul of the SEC regulations and advertising a business is we usually get with the business owner, and the business owner says, I am willing to sell 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But I would rather find a strategic partner or a family office or a private equity group that's willing to buy a controlling interest or maybe even a non-controlling interest. And that's what happens. And so we do that often.
Excellent. So I guess from your standpoint, there's a lot of things in the future that you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, and I ask people this all the time, and you're out in the marketplace. Out of 100% of the businesses that sell, what percentage do you think there's a professional intermediary involved? I'll ask you the question.
I would say with what we see most of the time, there is.
Okay. Florida's a little different. We're a lot more organized. I think it's probably maybe 33% of the time.
Okay.
Other times, certainly business owners do it themselves. They call their attorneys. They have people, they give it to an employee or a family member, or they just flat out close it because they don't know that there's an option to sell their business.
Mm-hmm.
So we think there's a lot of bandwidth out there where people just don't know that our services exist. So we think there's that bandwidth as well. And the other thing we're excited about too is, Gen Z and millennials have finally figured out that they want to be entrepreneurs and they want to grow something and they want to buy something. And we want to teach individual entrepreneurs, and we have some of these entrepreneurs now that buy multiple businesses from us. They buy one business and then they buy something to add on to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, for instance, we have Jeff, and they own a landscaping company. They've done about 6-7 deals with us. They've bought several landscaping companies. They bought a pest control company. They bought a landscape architect company. They bought a florist. And so they've built this company into, multi-million-dollar business over the last several years.
So you've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, and I mean, those are everybody who comes in really is an aspiring entrepreneur, right? They want to not necessarily start it, but they want to buy a business like you did. What do you think? And you've seen some, I'm sure, have great success. You've seen some that don't. What would you say is one of the most defining characteristics of those who became successful?
They're hard workers. I just wrote an article on, what does that mean to work hard in the business? And they're hard workers and they follow through and they're trustworthy. Again, one of my big things is become a trusted advisor in your community. And I think you've done that over the years, whether, whatever project you're working on, people, I've backed you, other people look to back you because they trust you, right? They see you in the marketplace. They see you're successful. And they see you do the right thing in the marketplace too, right? So I think it's very indicative of entrepreneurs that go out there to get involved in nonprofits. I think that's a big thing. I think that shows that you're, trustworthy and that you're willing to give back and that, and not necessarily looking for return. And so, I always tell people, listen, failure in a small business can be overcome by hard work most of the time. We're here in Florida. There's 1,000 people a day moving here to Florida. It is constantly growing. If you buy a landscaping business, you buy a pool service business, you buy a medical, you buy a medical practice, you buy a distribution company, whatever it is, even a retail store. If you do the right thing by people, you show up, you charge them. You don't have to be the cheapest. You just have to be good and you have to provide a value. If you do all those things, it's really hard to mess it up. Really hard. And if things go south for some reason, all of a sudden there's another COVID, there's another stock market crash, there's another banking crisis, there's another whatever comes up. If you work hard through that, and back to your point of working with your partners, we bought our Orlando office. So I said we wound up partnering with John, and John Ruggieri was a great guy. And he decided, hey, he had some health concerns and he had opened 2 or 3 other businesses. And he said, hey, I don't want Transworld anymore. And per our agreement, we had to pay him a certain amount of money, which was a lot of money because he had built Orlando to a very nice business. We bought him out in 2007. By 2008, our commissions in Orlando went from $2 million a year to $300,000 in a year. Just Orlando was one of the hardest hit areas in Florida during that crisis because people were moving in. There was a big construction boom and it just ended. A lot of people moving from Europe to Orlando, where we were doing a lot of business, just dried up. So, what does John do? Does he foreclose on the loan I give, on the note that I give him? No. He says, don't worry about it, Andy. He says, I know you're good for it. You pay me when you can. And that's what we did. We restructured the note. And, so if you're in business and you start to do bad, I know, bankers are humans too. I mean, if you do the right thing, there will be people there that can help you.
I think that was a huge amount of great advice, frankly. But I'm going to pick up on that last thing you said, because I think as a banker, I think the one thing that we recognize, and who knows what the next year brings, right? There's a lot of uncertainty out there, more than usual. There's always uncertainty, but there's more than usual, I would say, right now. And, I've always encouraged the people that do business with us, if you have a problem, if you're going through a tough time, let's talk about it. There's nothing that we can't work through with somebody, right? Right. It's when somebody doesn't return your phone call or doesn't talk about what's going on in the business, then that's a problem. And that's when people get, nervous and have to take other actions,
Yeah, that communication is key. I mean, when we're doing deals, people get scared, people have remorse, people decide not to sell. There's so many people screaming in their ears, you're not getting enough money. We have a deal right now for 20-something million dollars. And, somebody I know very well is telling that owner, you should be able to get more. I'm like, I want to call him up and say, you write the check. And, so the worst thing you could do is go dark. They lose that communication. If that's when we know something's wrong. When all of a sudden somebody stops answering their phone, stops answering their email or text. We have a deal right now and, we're trying to figure it out, but all of a sudden the buyer has gone dark. Their lawyer has gone dark. We were supposed to close. It was a $3 million deal and nobody's picking up the phone. Mm-hmm. It's just, and something smells weird.
Yeah. Well, and just to also with another thing that you said, everybody has problems in business. Business is difficult at times. As long as somebody has integrity and they do the right thing. If you do the right thing and you fail in your business, there's no shame. No. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You go, you dust yourself off, you get back in the game, But if you don't have integrity, then that's another story. Then you can't come back.
Yeah, listen, I've had some failures. I borrowed money from my mom when I was in the guitar business and, eventually couldn't pay that back right at the end. I've taken care of my mom since then, same thing with our investors in the pasta shop. It was funny. We owned that pasta shop and the Gulf War broke out. And it was 91, right? And all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, like business dried up. And it was right before the Super Bowl. Whitney Houston was singing at the Super Bowl. And we had all these Super Bowl parties lined up and everybody decided it was like anti-American to have a party for Super Bowl. So all these stuff gets canceled. Oh, wow. And like now we're scrambling and we're, can't pay our bills and, and we had taken out loans at the time from 3 family members. The interest rate was 12%. 12%. So I was like, so I had to call everybody and say, hey, listen, the checks aren't coming this month. And we had to put the checks on hold for about 3-4 months, but I kept telling them, hey, we're here,
Hey, you want some spaghetti instead?
Right.
We got plenty of pasta.
We fed the family.
Yeah.
It was,
But I also want to go back because you talked about philanthropy and giving back to the community. You have been a huge example of that. You and your wife, Allison, you chaired the United Way. You do your Andy's dinner, pasta dinner. You've done a lot of great things in the community. So just want to recognize you for that. And then how did you get so involved in the community?
I guess I have a hard time saying no to things. But the pasta dinner was, again, I felt like I needed to get to know people in Florida. That was my big thing. And so I was at the chamber. I was at a chamber networking group, Power Partners, and we used to meet at the chamber every Tuesday. And LifeNet for Families, which was cooperative feeding program at the time, was in the lunch with us, and she's crying. And we're during the lunch, and we're like, "Why are you crying?" She's like, "The air conditioner's out at LifeNet, And they were at where Talent Liquors is on Broward Boulevard, if you know where that is. And so I said, everybody's standing there like doing nothing. And I'm like, I'll help you. She's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. I've sold some air conditioning companies. I'll go bend their arms, see if I can get a free air conditioner. Make a long story short, we couldn't get it free, but we got an air conditioner installed. And the executive director at the time said, hey, would you like to be on my board? I'm like, what's a board? I mean, this is how, like ignorant I was at the time. So I joined the board, eventually became chairman. We eventually built the building that we now are in and on Broward Boulevard. And I said to everybody's got to raise money. We got to do something to raise money this year. I said, I'm going to cook dinner for everybody. And that, we had, 30 people, raised $500. And that was the first pasta dinner. We just had our last one. We have about 1,000 people show up.
Wow.
I thank you for your support over the years. And, we raised a little over $300,000 for the last few years. And so it's been.
And it's into the millions now in total, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible. There's a lesson there too. You start something and if it's if it works, it grows and it takes on. I'm sure that now there's so many people involved in that as well, right? That are carrying that forward.
Yeah, there's a bunch of Malcolm Gladwell things that made it sticky, like that. I always say, whether it's a kid-friendly event, whether it's, casual, whether it's, it was low cost at the time. And it's just, there's a lot of reasons why it kept going and people like to support it. And, we've gotten so much back from that, and unexpected, certainly we've gotten tons of business from that, from being being philanthropic. And certainly we don't do it that, again, back to my early, upbringing, I realized, as I got out of college and was in the business world, that I was lucky, whether it was people, whether my family supporting me in some of my businesses, whether my father-in-law is supporting me, whether it was my fraternity brother supporting me, whether it was that I didn't have a bunch of college loans because my dad was able to pay for it. I realized, and now it's called privilege. I didn't realize what it was called back then, but I was privileged, right? And I need to pass that on. I need to take that and empower other people. And, we've run into such great people in our community like Greg Hale and so many people that realize that have taken things that they've, taken what breaks they got and now try to give other people those breaks.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great message. So anything else you want to share with the entrepreneurial viewers about success or the keys to success?
Yeah, I talked about working hard. The other thing I want to tell people is listen, being in business, you don't have to stay there forever. And by God, you're not going to be able to stay there forever because we all get old. and we all have to either retire or be taken out toes first from our business. So if you want, let's plan, let's talk, let's sit down and talk about where you want to go in your business, your goals in your business, how much money you want to retire with. Because if I could talk to you now, if I could talk to you and you know how SBA funding works, because that's the way most businesses get funded if a bank is going to be involved. If a bank's going to be involved in funding a bank, they're going to want 3 good years of financials. So if I could get hold of you now and look at your financials and say, stop playing with your inventory as a tax saving strategy, stop, having too little margins, stop holding this much inventory, or let's do this to increase sales instead of winding them down over the last 3 years. Let's do some things to make your business look good and thrive. That way somebody else wants to buy it and a bank can fund it.
That is such good advice. And, and we've seen that so many times in talking to many business owners where, the key is, and whether they're selling their business or not, if they're coming to a bank for a loan for anything, right?
Right.
You've got to make sure that you've got good, financial information. So
right.
That's just excellent advice. So now we're going to flip to the lightning round, where we're going to ask you a few rapid fire questions just to finish off.
Sure.
And so we're going to start with, what is your favorite book?
Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Good. Very
Love that
good
book.
I think we have that, don't we? No? I know one of our teammates here bought it and was reading it, Brandon. What is a song from your youth? I know the guitar, you've got to have some, like a theme song.
Wow, a theme song. There's a lot of good songs I like. I'm a Led Zeppelin fan, so I just like rocking out the things. So I don't know.
It's hard to pick one?
Yeah, it's hard to pick one.
We won't put you on the spot. What's the best piece of advice you ever received?
A best piece of advice I ever received was to, do the right thing. by people. So
that's excellent. How about AI? Does it scare you, or are you optimistic about it?
I'm optimistic about it. Of course, I read enough Isaac Asimov books to be scared of it too. But I think in the end, it's really going to help us. And there's a lot of exciting things moving forward.
If you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would that be?
That immediately popped in my head, my grandfather, because I loved him to death. So I guess that would be one. But, if you could have a dinner with like a Warren Buffett, that would be cool too.
That would be awesome. What are you most grateful for today?
My wife and my kids, my family. I'm very grateful for that.
How about someone you admire and why?
Someone I admire and why. And I'll go back to not being a family. I admire Alan Levin. I think he's,
that's a great one.
Yeah. I read his book recently, which he's like, I can't believe you read the whole thing. It was a great story of perseverance and doing the right thing and standing up for yourself. So I admire Alan.
Yeah, that is a really good one. He's a great person. Who is, what's a fear that you've overcome?
Fear of playing guitar, out in the open.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, again, some great things have happened through my charitable endeavors, and they've had some rock and roll nights where we've gone up there and played.
Was that with the United Way?
Yeah. United Way. But I started with Nova Southeastern. So,
okay.
Yeah.
What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie, so what popped in my head was, of course, like The Godfathers or Bad Boys with Sean Penn. I can't seem to get by that one.
And with all this talking about pasta, what's your favorite restaurant?
So my favorite restaurant, I'll just blurt out there, is Casa D'Angelo Angela does a great job. I can't ignore Runway 84 too. So there's some really good ones down here. The Cafe Vico, Marco that does such a fantastic job.
Yeah, those are 3 of my favorites too. I'm right there with you. I love those local where you see the owner, right? It's just like, you can't beat that. What do you do for hobbies when you're not working? And we know you work hard, but.
I actually I wrote a musical, which is a whole nother story for another day.
Gosh.
And we've been recording music and we've been talking about bringing it to a stage. So that's been my latest project.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an announcement.
Story for another podcast.
That's big news. So how can people get in touch with you, Andy?
Best way, just email me, ac@tworld.com, or go to my website at tworld.com. Be happy to talk to you about business or, talking about getting involved in your community too. I do a speech for nonprofits, showing them how to ask their boards for money.
Wow.
Yeah.
You might get a lot of calls for that.
I have gotten a lot of calls. I've done several boards recently. So it's been fun.
And I think so anybody out there who's an aspiring entrepreneur who might want to buy a business, it's a guy to call. Or if you have a business and you're ready to sell it, that's your baby.
Yeah, I'll send you my book too. So
and you've written a book on top of it too. And you have a podcast as well. So all those things. Well, listen, it's been a real pleasure talking with you, Andy.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming on today.
No problem. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks for tuning in to Locality's Making Bank podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to catch the latest episodes, and visit localitybank.com today to learn more about all the benefits of banking local.